Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big one, the Spanish Armada of 1588.
A classic story.
It really is. But, the common take is often just, England got lucky, the weather saved them.
Right, the Protestant Wind narrative.
Exactly. But we're going deeper today. Our sources let us unpack the strategies, the tech, the actual decisions. It wasn't just luck. It looks like a massive failure in planning and, well, maybe using the wrong tools for the job.
And you really need to grasp the stakes here from the get-go. This wasn't some minor border dispute.
Yeah.
This was King Philip II of Spain, the most powerful ruler in Europe, maybe the world at that time, launching an all-out attempt to essentially conquer England.
Overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, install a Catholic monarch, the work.
Precisely. Force Catholicism back onto England. If Spain had succeeded, wow, European history, maybe world history, looks completely different.
That really sets the scene. Okay, so let's dig into the Spanish side first. The grand plan. King Philip's Armada under the Duke of Medina Sidonia. It was meant to be this overwhelming show of force, right?
Oh, absolutely. An incredible display. It sails from Lisbon, sources say around 124 ships.
That's a lot of ships.
It is. And these aren't small patrol boats. We're talking huge galleons. Floating fortresses, basically.
Built to carry troops.
Exactly. About 27,000 men packed onto them, plus something like 1,100 heavy cannons. Serious firepower, so they thought.
But the strategy, it wasn't really about winning a sea battle, was it? It feels like the Navy was almost secondary.
That's a key point. The Spanish plan was fundamentally land-centric. The Navy's job wasn't to seek out and destroy the English fleet.
Their main goal.
Get to the English Channel, rendezvous with the Duke of Parma's elite army waiting in Flanders.
Across the water.
And then act as a ferry, a heavily armed ferry service to get Parma's troops safely across the Channel for the real work, the land invasion.
So everything depended on that link up. If anything disrupts that.
Disaster. The whole strategy collapses if they can't maintain formation to meet Parma on schedule. It's incredibly fragile looking back.
Which takes us to the English response. Obviously, they couldn't match Spain soldier for soldier, or even ship for ship in terms of sheer size.
No way. England just didn't have the resources for that kind of symmetric warfare.
So their approach had to be different from the start, more asymmetrical.
It absolutely had to be. Under Elizabeth, you had leaders like Lord Howard, Sir Francis Drake, maybe a bit more flamboyant.
Definitely.
But they relied on ingenuity. The English fleet numbered more ships overall, maybe around 197, but the type of ship was the crucial difference.
Okay, let's get into that. This clash of ship design. Spanish galleons, big, tough, designed for boarding.
Right. The classic Mediterranean style of naval warfare. Get close, grapple, send soldiers across to fight hand-to-hand on deck.
Like a land battle at sea.
Pretty much.
Right.
But the English have been developing something different, these race-built galleons.
What made them race-built?
Lower profile, less towering castles front and back. Made them more stable, less caught by the wind. And crucially, faster. Way more maneuverable than the bulky Spanish ships. They were designed so the ship itself was the weapon system, not just a transport platform.
So they could choose when and where to fight, dance around the Spanish.
Exactly. Avoid getting close enough for boarding, use their speed, a whole different concept of sea control.
And if the ship is the weapon, the cannons are the ammunition. You mentioned gunnery was key. What specifically made the English better there? Just saying better guns feels a bit thin.
No, you're right. We need the specifics. It's fascinating, actually. Two main things stand out in the sources. First, gun carriages.
Carriages?
Yeah, how the cannons were mounted. The English used these four-wheeled truck carriages. Much more efficient.
How so?
They allowed for much faster recoil management and reloading. An English crew could potentially fire, swab, reload, and fire again significantly faster than their Spanish counterparts.
Really? How much faster?
Some accounts suggest maybe twice as fast, or even better in some cases. The Spanish guns were often on older, simpler mounts, harder to reposition after firing.
So higher rate of fire for the English. Got it. What's the second thing?
The projectiles themselves and the guns firing them. The English tended to use more and slightly smaller caliber iron cannons firing cast iron round shot.
Cheaper?
Cheaper, yeah, and easier to mass produce. They could pack more guns onto their ships. The Spanish favored fewer, heavier bronze cannons, often designed for closer ranges, maybe firing more specialized shot intended to smash hulls at close quarters.
So the English could stand off further and just pepper the Spanish?
Precisely. Their advantage was in that medium to long range gunnery duel. Keep the distance, use the faster reload speed, and just keep hitting the Spanish ships, rigging, and personnel without letting them close for that decisive boarding action they wanted.
Okay, so picture this. The Armada is sailing up the channel. These initial fights, they weren't knockout blows, were they?
No, more like skirmishes, jabs. The English were definitely doing damage, using that speed and range advantage you mentioned, frustrating the Spanish, preventing them from getting close.
Testing the waters, so to speak.
Exactly, proving their tactics worked. But the Spanish maintained their crescent formation, disciplined, difficult to break, until Calais.
Ah, Calais. Medina Sidonia anchors the fleet there, waiting for word from Parma, right? He needs Parma's army to be ready.
Yes, a logistical pause. But it created this incredibly vulnerable situation. The whole Armada packed tightly together in the anchorage. A perfect target.
And the English saw their chance. The fire ships. Reading about this, it feels less like a battle tactic and more like psychological warfare.
It absolutely was. Pure terror weapon.
Yeah.
They took 8 older ships, packed them with anything flammable, pitch, gunpowder, you name it, set them ablaze, and sent them drifting on the tide right into the anchored Spanish fleet.
Late at night, pitch dark.
Imagine seeing that coming towards you. Uncontrolled fire bearing down on your wooden ship, crammed next to hundreds of others.
A nightmare scenario.
There's no coordinated defense against that in the dark in a panic. The only instinct is to get away.
So the Spanish commanders, they cut their anchor cables.
They had to. No time to haul up those heavy main anchors. Just cut the ropes and drift out, try to escape the flames.
And that was it for the formation.
Completely shattered. Instantly. Ships scattering into the darkness, losing contact, losing their cohesion, and critically, losing their main anchors.
Which meant no easy way to regroup or wait properly for Parma.
Exactly. The core strategic plan, the rendezvous, was effectively dead in the water right there, even before the main battle. The mission was compromised.
Which sets the stage for Gravelines, August 8th. With the Spanish scattered and maybe a bit panicked, the English could finally force a major engagement on their terms.
Now the English could fully exploit their advantages. At Gravelines, you see the payoff of those faster ships and better gunnery.
How did it play out?
The English ships basically sailed circles around the now disorganized Spanish vessels. They'd sweep in, fire devastating broadsides from, say, 100, maybe 200 yards.
Close enough for their iron cannonballs to do real damage.
Smash holes, shred rigging, injure crews, but still too far for the Spanish to easily board them, or even reply effectively with their slower firing, perhaps shorter ranged heavy guns.
Like keeping someone at arm's length and just landing punch after punch.
That's a great analogy. The Spanish captains tried desperately to close the distance, to initiate the boarding actions they were trained for.
But the English ships were too nimble.
Just sailed away, reloaded, came back for another pass. They controlled the range, controlled the tempo of the battle, inflicted heavy damage while taking relatively few hits themselves.
So after Gravelines, there was no going back. The invasion was off.
Clearly off. No formation, damaged ships, the rendezvous with Parma now impossible. The Duke of Medina Sidonia really had no choice.
Retreat was the only option.
But they couldn't go back south through the channel. The English fleet was still there, blocking the way, and the winds were against them.
So, north, around Scotland and Ireland.
The only route left open. A long, dangerous voyage back to Spain through the North Atlantic.
And this is where the weather really becomes a major factor, turning a defeat into a catastrophe.
Yes. The popular image of the storms isn't entirely wrong, it just came after the decisive military encounters.
What happened on that journey home?
It was brutal. The ships were already damaged from the fighting at Gravelines and the earlier skirmishes. They were low on food, water, ammunition.
And sailing into notoriously bad water.
Exactly. The North Atlantic in late summer, early autumn, infamous for storms. These huge, perhaps less seaworthy Spanish galleons, many without their main anchors, struggling with damaged rigging. They were just battered by gales.
Wrecked along the coasts.
Many were driven ashore on the rocky coasts of Scotland and especially Ireland. Thousands of sailors and soldiers drowned, starved, or were killed after making it ashore. A truly horrific end to the campaign for so many.
The human cost. It's staggering when you compare the two sides.
It really drives home the scale of the Spanish failure. Let's look at the numbers the sources suggest. Spain lost maybe close to half its fleet, around 60 ships out of the initial 124, give or take.
And the men.
This is the shocking part. Estimates hover around 20,000 Spanish dead. 20,000, mostly from the storms, disease, starvation on that return journey.
20,000. And the English losses in battle.
Incredibly light. Maybe only about 100 men killed in direct combat.
100 versus 20,000.
Now, England did lose more men later, thousands actually, but that was mostly due to disease typhus, dysentery spreading through their own fleet while it was kept mobilized after the danger passed. But in terms of combat losses, the disparity is just enormous.
So if we recap the reasons for the English win, it's a combination, isn't it?
Definitely not just one thing. It's the faster, more agile ships.
Right.
It's the superior gunnery, faster firing, better range tactics.
The fire ships at Calais, the psychological blow, breaking the formation.
Crucial turning point. And then, yes, the weather during the retreat turned a military defeat into an utter disaster for Spain.
It feels like a perfect storm, strategically speaking, for England.
It really does. And the impact wasn't just military. This event is seen as a huge turning point in European power dynamics.
How so? What were the immediate effects?
Well, immediately, it ended Philip II's grand design to conquer England and impose Catholicism by force. That threat was gone, and it hugely boosted Protestant morale across Europe.
A symbolic victory as much as a military one.
Absolutely. But the long-term consequences were arguably even bigger.
Okay.
This defeat marked the beginning of the end for Spanish naval supremacy. It didn't happen overnight, but the aura of invincibility was shattered.
And it allowed England?
It secured England's independence and really paved the way for England, later Britain, to develop its own global maritime empire over the next centuries. It created space for them on the world stage.
Did it affect other conflicts happening at the time?
Oh, significantly. Spain was deeply involved in trying to crush the Dutch revolt in the Netherlands.
Right.
Losing the Armada and the massive resources poured into it hampered Spain's ability to project power there. So the Armada's failure indirectly helped the Dutch Republic secure its independence.
Wow. So it weakened Spain's hand across the board in these ongoing religious and political wars in Europe.
Definitely. It limited Spanish influence and power projection for decades. The ripples spread far beyond the English Channel.
It really has been fascinating to move beyond the simple story. This deep dive shows it was so much about technology, tactics, logistics, that clash between the old way of naval warfare and the new.
The English maneuverability, their gunnery doctrine, it just proved superior on the day.
That combination really was key.
But think about this as we wrap up. Consider how that one campaign, that one strategic failure amplified by nature, didn't just defeat an invasion force, it fundamentally altered the trajectory of naval power for centuries.
How do you mean?
Well, the lessons learned or reinforced in 1588 about speed, firepower, range, maneuverability, that became the dominant paradigm for naval thinking. It arguably set the blueprint for naval supremacy that powers like Britain would follow, and perfect.
So the question for you, the listener, to ponder is, what if it had gone the other way, or even ended in a draw? Would England have ever become the global sea power it did? How much did this single event, this confirmation of a new way to fight at sea, truly shape the next 300 years of maritime history and global power? It really makes you think about the long shadow cast by tactical innovation.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something huge from history, the Spanish Armada, back in 1588. It's famous, sure, but this isn't just about the sea battle. We really want to dig into why. Why did King Philip II of Spain risk, well, pretty much everything, his money, his reputation, his navy on this incredibly risky plan to invade England? What was going through his head?
Well, when you look at the sources, it becomes clear pretty quickly this wasn't, a snap decision or based on just one thing. Philip saw England as this multi-pronged threat. It was deeply personal, yes, but also religious, political, and very much about the economy, too. They're all tangled together.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where should we start? Maybe with the religion. That feels like the most intense driver.
Yeah, I think that's the bedrock, absolutely.
Right.
Philip II, look, his whole identity as a ruler was tied up in being the Catholic king. His main goal, you could argue, was bringing England back into the Catholic fold. By 1588, under Queen Elizabeth, England wasn't just Protestant, it was like a beacon for Protestantism across Europe, a symbol of heresy from his point of view.
And this break from Rome, it started with Henry VIII, obviously, but by Elizabeth's time, it was really baked into English identity, wasn't it? Rejecting the Pope was almost like declaring independence, politically speaking.
Exactly, and Philip didn't just see this as an English problem, he saw it as a threat to Catholic Europe. The sources are pretty clear on this. The Pope was right there with him, offered money, a lot of money, if the invasion worked, and spiritual backing too. They basically called the Armada a holy war. the mission: topple Elizabeth, put a Catholic back on the throne. It was meant to be the start of rolling back the Reformation.
Wow. Okay, so a holy war footing. But you say it gets more personal, more political too. There's history there between Philip and England, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. A really complicated history. People sometimes forget Philip was actually king of England for a while. He was married to Elizabeth's older sister, Mary I Bloody Mary. So he felt he had a stake, a connection to the English throne.
Right, which must have made what happened next feel even more like a rejection. Because after Mary died, he didn't just walk away.
No, he didn't. He actually proposed marriage to Elizabeth herself, tried to keep that Anglo-Spanish link going, keep England in his orbit. And when she turned him down, well, that wasn't just a no. In royal terms, that was a major snub.
Yeah.
It really cemented the political divide and, yeah, probably fueled his dislike of her personally.
And that dislike, it wasn't just simmering in the background, was it?
Yeah.
It blew up pretty quickly into actual conflict, especially over the Netherlands.
Yes, absolutely. Philip was pouring resources into crushing Protestant rebels in the Spanish Netherlands, a huge, expensive headache for him. Elizabeth knew this was his weak spot, so what does she do? She starts actively helping the rebels, sending money, supplies, even troops eventually.
So not just moral support.
Yeah.
Real interference.
Oh, it was basically war by proxy. After the marriage rejection, this felt like, the ultimate betrayal, stabbing him in the back by supporting his enemies. It pushed things past the point of no return, really.
You can almost feel that frustration coming through. Okay, so religion, politics, personal animosity. But let's talk about the money, the economics. Spain was this superpower, right? Funded by gold and silver from the Americas.
Totally reliant on it. And the sources show that by the mid-1580s, these English attacks on Spanish shipping, they weren't just annoying anymore. They were becoming a serious strategic problem.
We're talking about the sea dogs, like Sir Francis Drake. And these weren't just random pirates, were they?
Not at all. These guys were privateers. Often they had letters of marque from Elizabeth, basically government permission to plunder Spanish ships and towns. It was semi-official piracy.
And Drake, he was particularly bold. That raid on Cadiz.
The Cadiz raid in 1587. Yes, that was huge. He sailed right into one of Spain's main ports, burned maybe 30 ships. But crucially, he also destroyed tons of barrel staves. Seasoned wood, ready to be made into barrels.
Barrel staves. Why was that so important? Sounds minor.
Oh, not at all. Think about it. An armada needs thousands of barrels. For water, for wine, for food. Everything to keep the sailors and soldiers alive for months at sea. Without those barrels, you can't store supplies properly. That one raid, destroying the barrel wood, probably delayed the Armada by a whole year. It caused massive logistical chaos. So you've got the financial drain from the stolen treasure, the constant disruption, the sheer humiliation. It hit Spain's ability to pay its armies, build ships, everything. It was really starting to hurt. Philip wasn't just trying to defend his ships anymore. He wanted revenge. He wanted to shut down the source of the piracy, England itself. Taking England meant securing his treasure fleets, restoring Spain's finances, and showing the world you don't mess with the Spanish Empire.
Okay, so we've got the religious crusade, the political payback over the Netherlands, the marriage snub, and this urgent need to stop the economic bleeding from Drake and the others. Let's zoom out a bit. What was the bigger picture, the grand strategy? Spain was top dog in 1588. What did conquering England achieve for Philip beyond those immediate issues?
Well, it was about cementing that top dog status, really, locking it down for the future. Philip had these huge strategic aims. First, knocking out England meant getting rid of the main Protestant power supporting rebels everywhere. It could destabilize the whole Reformation movement in Europe.
And the English Channel itself. That piece of water was key, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. Controlling the channel was vital for Spain. It was the highway needed to link the Armada fleet coming from Spain with Philip's elite army under the Duke of Parma, stationed over in the Netherlands. That army was supposed to do the actual invasion of England. So securing the channel meant Parma's troops could cross safely. It also secured trade routes to Flanders, which was economically vital. And it blocked enemies using the channel against Spain. And beyond that, beating England would just underscore Spanish power across the board, send a clear message to France, to everyone, that Spain was dominant and intended to stay that way.
There was also the issue of who should rule England, right? Philip didn't just object to Elizabeth's religion, he questioned her right to be queen at all, didn't he?
That's right. He constantly supported Catholic rivals to the throne, most famously Mary, Queen of Scots. She was Catholic, she had a claim, and Philip backed her.
Until Elizabeth had her executed in 1587.
Exactly. And Mary's execution, That really hardened Philip's resolve. It shifted things from maybe undermining Elizabeth to needing outright regime change. The invasion became the only option in his mind. And there's one more element, sort of a defensive one: fear. Spain was genuinely worried England might team up with France or maybe Scotland, other Protestant states, create a powerful anti-Spain bloc, so the Armada could be seen as a preemptive strike too, take out England before it could become the cornerstone of an even bigger alliance against Spain.
It really sounds like Philip fell backed into a corner, but also saw a massive strategic opportunity. You mentioned earlier, though, that the sources stressed the religious angle, but wasn't it Drake and the stolen gold that really forced his hand? Was the religion maybe the justification, but the money the real driver?
That's a great question, and it gets to the core of it, I think. Philip was genuinely devout, no doubt about it, but he was also a king running an empire. The fascinating thing is how interdependent those motives were. You can't really separate them cleanly. The religious cause gave the Armada its moral authority. It justified the immense cost and risk, both to his own people and internationally. The Pope's blessing was vital for that. But the economic attacks by Drake and the others, that provided the urgency. The constant bleeding of funds, the logistical nightmares, that made the threat immediate, existential. And you see, the economic weakness caused by England allowed England to fund the political threat, helping the Dutch rebels, which in turn undermined the religious stability Philip craved. They were all linked. For Philip, solving one meant solving them all.
So what does this all mean? How did these different pressures, religious, personal, political, economic, strategic, finally push him to launch this Invincible fleet?
It looks like the mid-1580s just became this critical point, a perfect storm, really. Suddenly, all the main pillars of Spanish power and Philip's own identity, his Catholic faith, his political authority in Europe, his empire's economic health, and his overall imperial dominance all seemed to be under direct, simultaneous attack from England. He reached a point where just playing defense wasn't enough anymore. He concluded he had to go on the offensive, eliminate the source of all the problems, overthrowing Elizabeth, restoring Catholicism, stopping the piracy, securing the Netherlands. It all boiled down to one massive, decisive action: invade England. That was the only way he saw to secure everything.
It's incredible when you lay it all out like that. The sheer weight of expectation riding on that fleet. It really was Philip's gamble to fix everything at once.
Absolutely. And you have to think, for him, failure wouldn't just be losing a battle. It would feel like the failure of his entire reign, his entire life's work. Which brings us to a final thought for you, listening. We've talked about these deeply interwoven motives: the religious crusade blessed by the Pope, the need to stop Drake's crippling raids, the anger over English meddling in the Netherlands, the strategic imperative. If you had to isolate just one factor, which one do you think Philip himself viewed as the absolute most critical reason, the one thing that, above all others, made launching the Armada unavoidable? What was the ultimate non-negotiable for him? Okay, so when most of us think about the Spanish Armada, what comes to mind?
Usually huge ships, right? The battle itself, maybe that storm.
Exactly. Gravelines, the Protestant winds scattering the fleet. It's this spectacular story of naval warfare.
It really is. But focusing just on the military side, well, you miss the core reason why it even happened.
That's what we're diving into today. We're sort of peeling back the layers of naval strategy to get at the ideological heart of it all. Why did King Philip II launch this massive, world-changing campaign?
And it wasn't just about naval power or territory, not really. At its absolute core, it was an ideological mission. You could almost call it a spiritual and political crusade.
Aimed at resolving maybe the biggest dynastic crisis in Europe at the time.
Precisely. And the absolute center of that crisis wasn't Philip or Elizabeth, the monarchs actually fighting.
No, it was someone else entirely. A woman who was, well, effectively powerless and imprisoned.
Yeah.
Mary, Queen of Scots.
That's right.
So our deep dive today is all about shifting that focus. Less about the cannons, more about the crown or the claim to it. We want to extract the political, the symbolic justification Philip absolutely needed.
Yeah, our mission here is to show you why Mary, Queen of Scots, who often gets sidelined in history, maybe you just mentioned around her execution, was actually the essential linchpin for the entire Spanish plan.
The ideological linchpin.
Absolutely. She was the Catholic figurehead. Her potential restoration to the English throne. That was the main political driver for the invasion.
Without her, Philip really struggled for justification, didn't he?
He did. He lacked that unified reason.
Okay, let's unpack that. I mean, the rivalry between Catholic Spain and Protestant England, that was already intense, obviously.
Oh, yeah. trade disputes, privateering, Drake and the others, plus competition in the New World. Plenty of friction.
But Philip was generally quite cautious about trying to just depose another monarch, wasn't he? He needed a really strong cause, legally and religiously.
Exactly. So why Mary? Why pick her as the champion for this enterprise of England?
It's fascinating because, as you said, he wasn't initially trying to claim the English throne for himself, was he?
No, not directly. He needed legitimacy. And back then, legitimacy was all about, accepted succession rules and religious alignment. Mary offered both.
So help us understand the Catholic view on Elizabeth's legitimacy, because that's really the nub of the issue here.
Right. So from the viewpoint of the papacy, and certainly Philip's court, Elizabeth was considered illegitimate.
Why? Because of her parents?
Yes. They didn't recognize Henry VIII's divorce from Catherine of Aragon, so his marriage to Anne Boleyn. Invalid, according to Rome.
So in the eyes of Catholic doctrine, Elizabeth couldn't legally inherit the throne, even if English law said she could?
Pretty much. And this became official, you could say, in 1570 with the papal bull Regnans and Excelsis.
The one that excommunicated and deposed Elizabeth.
Exactly. So from that moment, devout Catholics across Europe felt, ideologically obligated to support a legitimate alternative.
Enter Mary, Queen of Scots.
Precisely. She had the bloodline, a direct descendant of Henry VII. She was devoutly Catholic, and many European powers saw her as the rightful heir. So she wasn't just a convenient pawn.
She was the necessary foundation.
The ideological bedrock, yeah.
So Mary's very existence, her claim, it transformed the whole thing. It wasn't just a standard war for territory or power.
Which would have been much harder for Philip to sell, both at home and to the Pope.
Instead, it became this grander cause.
Yeah.
A war of succession, a religious rescue mission almost.
It gave him the moral high ground, or at least a claim to it. It elevated the whole campaign into the enterprise of England.
A mission with a kind of divine mandate.
That's how it was framed. Mary's claim provided the legal and religious cover Philip needed. It helped him rally his nobles, get that crucial papal blessing, and crucially secure the enormous funding needed for the Armada.
Without her specific claim, her bloodline, her faith?
It would have just looked like opportunistic conquest. Much harder to justify.
Okay, so knowing the stakes were that high, ideologically speaking, let's move to the grand strategy. This wasn't just about winning a sea battle. If the Armada succeeded, the plan was to, completely flip England's identity.
Oh, absolutely. The goals were huge, totally integrated. And Mary was the key to unlocking all of them.
Right. So objective 1, get rid of Elizabeth.
Depose and neutralize Elizabeth I. That's the immediate military goal, regime change. Simple enough on paper.
But then it gets political fast.
Immediately. Objective 2, install a Catholic monarch. That meant Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne.
Why was that so important? To stabilize things?
Yes, stabilize the situation internally, provide a ruler who naturally aligned with Spain and the papacy, and crucially, it would legitimize the invasion itself after the fact.
And having a Catholic ruler naturally leads to the biggest goal of all, doesn't it? Reversing the English Reformation.
That's the third objective, and maybe the most important for the long game in Europe, restoring Catholicism in England.
This wasn't just a side effect, it was the main point.
Absolutely. Our sources show that commanders like the Duke of Parma, who was meant to lead the invasion force from Flanders, were expected to oversee this religious restoration. Imagine that shift England, this Protestant bastion, suddenly Catholic again.
And connecting that to the wider European picture, there's a fourth objective.
Yes, the geopolitical checkmate move, really. Align England with Spanish and papal interests?
How'd that work?
Well, think about the Dutch revolt. The Protestant rebels in the Netherlands fighting Spain, England was their main backer.
So if England becomes a Catholic ally of Spain...
The Dutch rebels lose their primary source of funding, support, sanctuary. It isolates Philip's enemies and strengthens Catholic influence right across Europe. A decisive tilt in the balance of power.
So Mary's claim wasn't just symbolic, it was the blueprint for achieving all four objectives, the whole package solution.
She was the absolute key. She turned what was a massive military gamble into something presented as a divine and dynastic necessity.
Okay, but then, the huge problem, the complication that made this whole strategy incredibly risky.
Right. Philip's pouring millions into this grand crusade, planning everything down to the last detail.
But the person the entire mission is built around is completely out of his control. Where was Mary when all this planning was hitting its peak?
Smack bang in the middle of enemy territory, held prisoner in England.
By Elizabeth's government, the very people Philip was trying to overthrow.
Exactly. And she'd been a captive for, what, nearly 20 years by that point.
And she wasn't just under house arrest for no reason. The English government saw her as a genuine threat, didn't they? The focus of plot after plot.
Absolutely. Think of the Babington plot, which directly led to her execution. Elizabeth and her ministers, like William Cecil, knew Mary was a rallying point for Catholics wanting to restore the old faith. They treated her exactly as she was, a potential alternative queen, possibly backed by foreign powers.
So her captivity, the sources call it a thorn in Philip's strategy.
A major vulnerability, yes. It created this huge strategic risk.
Yeah.
What if the English just executed her?
Before the Armada could even arrive.
Right. If that happened, the entire justification of the plan to immediately install the legitimate Catholic queen just evaporates. Poof.
And this is where the timeline gets really critical, doesn't it? Something often glossed over.
It really is. Mary was executed in February 1587.
And the Armada sailed.
Over a year later, May 1588. Her death happened after the planning was essentially finalized, but before the fleet actually launched.
Wow. So her death must have thrown a massive wrench into Philip's plans, politically, ideologically.
Huge crisis for Philip. It completely changed the narrative. It couldn't be a rescue mission anymore.
So it became, what, a mission of vengeance?
It became a major part of it, yes. Vengeance for a murdered Catholic queen. But it also complicated the succession issue massively.
Because her son, James VI of Scotland, was the next legal claimant, but he was Protestant.
Exactly. So Philip had to subtly shift the justification again. Now, the Armada was needed to avenge Mary and somehow pave the way for a Catholic succession, maybe through some other relative, or perhaps hoping James might convert, or even placing a Spanish claimant on the throne eventually. It got much messier.
It forced him to rely much more heavily on just the military aspect, the brute force of the invasion.
It did. The clean political transition via Mary was gone.
So what was the backup plan? The contingency. If they couldn't guarantee her safety or after she died, how did they plan to actually set up a new government?
Well, the original plan, before her death, banked on overwhelming force creating the space for their installation. The Armada defeats the English fleet, Parma's army lands, secures territory.
And then they'd basically install her.
Yes, they likely had documents ready, declarations to legitimize her rule immediately upon her release or rescue. But after her execution, that specific plan was useless.
So what then? Just military rule?
Essentially, yes, in the initial phase. Establish a provisional Catholic administration, secure control, implement the religious changes by force, and then figure out the succession. Determine the most suitable Catholic heir, or maybe even a Spanish regent or governor for a time.
So they had to rely on sheer power to create legitimacy instead of inheriting it smoothly through Mary?
Exactly. The battle itself became the key to forcing a political solution. But the lock had changed when Mary died.
Which means the failure of the Armada. It wasn't just a military loss at sea.
No, it was the complete collapse of the entire ideological and political project that underpinned it. That project had already been destabilized months earlier by Mary's execution.
The ship's failing was almost the final nail in the coffin for that specific vision.
It was the definitive end of any realistic hope for restoring Catholicism in England through Mary's legitimate claim.
Okay, so boiling it all down, what does this really mean for how we should understand the Armada?
It means Mary wasn't just a pawn or a side story. She was central. Her existence, her Catholic faith, her dynastic claim. That was the reason Philip could frame this incredibly expensive, incredibly risky war as a just cause.
He used her plight to sell it to his own people, the nobility, the Pope, the whole Catholic world, as a righteous mission, not just a power grab.
Her potential restoration was the major ideological and political motive. Her life, and then her death, symbolized the huge religious and dynastic struggles of that whole era. It makes the conflict less about ships and more about, well, the soul of Europe, you could say.
So the big takeaway for you listening is this. The Spanish Armada fundamentally wasn't just about naval tactics. It was driven by dynastic legitimacy.
And Mary, Queen of Scots, even though she was imprisoned miles away while the fleets were being built, she was the absolute ideological prerequisite for the whole thing.
Without that religious cover, that legitimate claim that only she offered.
And later, the powerful motive of vengeance for her death. Philip simply lacked the unified justification he needed to launch such an enormous attack against another European monarch. The military strategy really followed the ideological need.
Which leaves us with a really interesting question for you to think about, looking at history, maybe even current events.
How often are huge political or military actions justified, maybe even genuinely driven by the symbolic importance or the suffering of one particular person?
Rather than just cold, hard, strategic, or economic calculation, when does a symbol become the strategy itself?
It's something worth considering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, exploring those connections between dynasty, religion, and conflict.
Until next time.